The Valley of Diamonds shimmered under the scorching sun. It wasn't the sand that glittered, though. Thousands upon thousands of diamonds lay scattered across the valley floor. They sparkled like stars fallen to earth, a breathtaking and dangerous sight. For this dazzling beauty hid a deadly secret. The air hung heavy and hot. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the occasional hiss of the wind as it whipped through the valley. The walls rose up sharply on either side, trapping the heat and creating an oven-like atmosphere. It was a place of breathtaking beauty and terrifying danger. This valley, whispered about in hushed tones in faraway lands, promised untold riches, but it also held a terrifying reputation, one that kept even the bravest adventurers at bay. For the Valley of Diamonds was more than just a treasure trove. It was a death trap patrolled by creatures as ancient as the valley itself. Those who dared to dream of claiming the diamonds for themselves rarely lived to tell the tale. The valley held its secrets close, guarded by fear and whispered warnings. It was a place of dazzling beauty and lurking peril, a place where dreams could easily turn into nightmares. Giant snakes, their scales glinting like polished emeralds, ruled the valley floor. They moved with a hypnotic grace, their bodies weaving between the diamonds, their tongues tasting the air for any hint of danger. These were not ordinary serpents. They were enormous, ancient creatures, their scales toughened by centuries under the desert sun. Even the bravest warrior would tremble at the sight of these monstrous reptiles. Their hisses echoed through the valley, a chilling reminder of the danger that lurked within. But these fearsome creatures, despite their dominance, lived in fear of something else. Something that ruled the skies above. Every now and then a shadow would block out the sun. A vast shape would descend from the heavens, its wings stirring the air into a frenzy. It was the Roc, a gigantic bird of prey, its wingspan wider than a house. The mere mention of its name sent shivers down the spines of the bravest adventurers. The snakes, for all their size and ferocity, knew they were no match for the Roc's razor-sharp talons and beak. The Roc was the true king of the valley, and even the giant snakes would slither into their dens, seeking refuge when its shadow fell upon the glittering diamonds. It was a battle of titans, a clash of apex predators, and in this valley survival was a game of cunning and luck. Our hero, a young adventurer named Jack, found himself trapped in this valley of shimmering danger. He had heard the legends, of course, but like so many before him, the lure of the diamonds had proven too strong to resist. Now, with the sun beating down and the giant snakes closing in, he was paying the price for his greed. Jack's heart pounded in his chest. He ducked behind a large diamond, its facets reflecting the sunlight like 1,000 tiny mirrors. He could hear the heavy breathing of the snakes, their scales scraping against the rocks. They were close, too close. He had to find shelter, and fast. The stories of the Roc offered him a glimmer of hope. If the snakes feared the giant bird, then maybe, just maybe, it could be his key to survival. He just had to stay alive long enough for the Roc to return. His eyes darted around, searching for any sign of an escape route, a crevice, a cave, anything. Suddenly he spotted it, a small dark opening in the side of the valley wall. It wasn't much, but it was his only chance. Jack didn't hesitate. He scrambled towards the opening, his heart pounding in his ears, the hissing of the snakes urging him onward. He had to reach the cave before they reached him. The cave was small and dark, but it offered some protection from the searing heat and the watchful eyes of the giant snakes. Jack collapsed on the cool cave floor, his chest heaving. He was safe, for now, but he knew he couldn't stay there forever. He had to find a way out of the valley, a way to escape with his life, and maybe, just maybe, a handful of diamonds. As if on cue, a strange thing happened. Large chunks of raw meat began to rain down from the sky, landing with sickening thuds on the valley floor. The snakes, sensing an easy meal, slithered towards the meat, their hunger overriding their usual caution. Jack watched in astonishment. He had heard whispers of this, a legend among traders and travelers. The legend said that long ago, a powerful sultan, desperate to possess the valley's diamonds, devised a plan. He would use the Roc, the only creature the snakes feared, to collect the diamonds for him. And so he trained the giant bird, rewarding it with feasts of fresh meat dropped into the valley. Jack watched as the snakes greedily devoured the meat, their attention completely diverted. He remembered the rest of the legend. It spoke of how the rock, after dropping its feast, would sometimes swoop down and snatch up the largest, juiciest-looking chunks of meat, carrying them back to its nest high in the mountains. A daring plan began to form in Jack's mind. It was a long shot, a desperate gamble, but it was his only chance. He had to get close to the falling meat, close enough to attach himself to a piece before the rock returned. He knew it was risky, but the alternative, being trapped in the valley with the snakes, was even worse. Jack's eyes darted around the cave, searching for anything that could help him. He needed something strong, something that could withstand the weight of his body and the force of the rock's ascent. His gaze fell upon a tangle of thick vines growing at the back of the cave. They were strong, supple, and looked perfect for his desperate plan. He quickly set to work, his fingers working with a speed born of desperation. He wove the vines together, creating a makeshift harness, strong enough, he hoped, to hold his weight. He tested the strength of the vines, pulling on them with all his might. They held firm. His heart pounded with a mixture of fear and excitement. It was a crazy plan. But the more he thought about it, the more he realized it just might work. He had to time it perfectly, attaching himself to a piece of meat just as the rock swooped down to collect its bounty. It was a risky plan, a dance with death, but it was his only hope of escape. With the harness complete, Jack turned his attention to the diamonds scattered across the valley floor. He had to act fast, gathering as many of the precious stones as he could before the rock returned. He carefully made his way out of the cave, keeping a watchful eye out for any sign of the giant snakes. He darted from one diamond to another, his hands working furiously, stuffing the glittering stones into his pockets. Each diamond represented a small fortune, but he knew better than to be greedy. He couldn't afford to be weighed down. He had to be light enough for the rock to carry him to safety. Jack's heart pounded in his chest as he gathered the diamonds. He could hear the distant cries of the rock echoing through the valley, a stark reminder of the danger he was in and the daring plan he was about to undertake. He knew he didn't have much time. With his pockets bulging with diamonds, Jack retreated back to the relative safety of the cave. He took a deep breath, trying to calm his racing heart. It was almost time. He could feel it in his bones. He checked his makeshift harness one last time, making sure it was secure. His life depended on it. The shadow of the rock fell upon the valley once more, sending the giant snakes slithering back into their dens. Jack watched from the mouth of the cave, his heart pounding in his chest. This was it, the moment of truth. He took a deep breath and charged out of the cave. He ran towards the nearest chunk of meat, his eyes fixed on the sky, his makeshift vine harness digging into his shoulders. He had to time this perfectly. He couldn't afford to hesitate. The rock was almost upon him, its giant wings stirring the air into a frenzy. With a desperate leap, Jack launched himself at the meat, his fingers closing tightly around the rough edges. He felt a surge of relief as his harness held firm. The next moment he was being lifted off the ground, the world tilting beneath him. He had done it. The rock, its talons firmly grasping the meat, soared into the sky, carrying Jack with it. He held on for dear life, his knuckles white, his entire body trembling with the exertion and the sheer terror of it all. Below him, the Valley of Diamonds shrunk away, the giant snakes nothing more than tiny specks on the glittering valley floor. The wind whipped at Jack's face, tearing at his clothes. He closed his eyes, afraid to look down at the dizzying drop below. The air grew colder as they climbed higher and higher, the valley becoming a distant memory. He could feel the powerful muscles of the rock working beneath him, carrying him further and further away from the valley of death. He dared to open his eyes, just a sliver at first, then wider as he acclimated to the dizzying height. The world stretched out below him, a breathtaking panorama of mountains and deserts. He could see for miles in every direction. It was both exhilarating and terrifying. He had never felt so small, so insignificant, yet so incredibly alive. He had escaped the Valley of Diamonds, a feat few could boast, and he had the pockets full of diamonds to prove it. He allowed himself a small smile, a flicker of triumph in the face of overwhelming odds. As the rock soared through the sky, Jack felt a surge of gratitude for the fearsome creature. It had been his ticket out of a deadly situation, his unlikely savior. He knew he would never forget this day, the day he cheated death in the Valley of Diamonds. The rock finally landed in its nest, a plateau high up in the mountains. The moment its talons touched down, Jack released his grip on the meat and scrambled away, putting as much distance between himself and the giant bird as possible. He watched as the rock, oblivious to the precious cargo it had carried, tore into its meal. Exhausted but exhilarated, Jack collapsed onto the rocky ground, his heart still pounding from his ordeal. He reached into his pockets and pulled out a handful of diamonds. They sparkled in the sunlight, a dazzling reminder of his adventure. He had done it. He had faced his fears, outsmarted the giant snakes, and even hitched a ride with the legendary rock. He had escaped the Valley of Diamonds with his life and a fortune in precious stones. He was a true adventurer, a survivor. Jack spent the next few days making his way down from the mountains, his pockets heavy with diamonds. He knew his life would never be the same. He had stared death in the face and emerged victorious. He had faced the Valley of Diamonds and lived to tell the tale, and in the years that followed, his story would be told and retold, a legend whispered around campfires, a tale of courage, cunning, and the glittering allure of the Valley of Diamonds.